Margaret Edson's play Wit begins with the protagonist, Vivian Baring, immediately breaking the fourth wall. She addresses the audience directly, and when she does that, she creates a bond and an intimacy between her and the audience. Breaking the fourth wall is the most important literary term that you can associate with this play because Vivian does it a lot. In fact, you could sort of refer to this play as a conversation between Vivian and the audience. It's much like a teacher giving a lecture, in fact, and that's sort of the relationship she has with us. Everything else is sort of filler. It's the story. It's you can see the things that are happening to her, but she's going to give you commentary on everything that happens to her as she develops her own character. And so, what we see in the first half of the play is who she is. And then in the second half of the play, and remember, it's a one act play, we start to see her character develop and grow and change a little bit before her ultimate death. Now, although this is a very modern play, Margaret Edson is borrowing a few things from Shakespeare. One of the things that she's borrowing is this breaking the fourth wall. Shakespeare does this all the time. Romeo and Juliet begins when the chorus comes out and immediately addresses the audience. And evil characters in Shakespeare often break the fourth wall. And the convention is pretty old. It's as old as Shakespeare, if not older. But one of the things about breaking the fourth wall in a soliloquy is that what the person is saying to you, it's fact, it's honest, it's how they really think and how they really feel. And that also gives us a kind of intimacy and insight into Vivian's character. There's no unreliable narrator here, except at times we see Vivian's faults and flaws better than she does. An early example of that is when she chooses not to go to the library, but I'll get to that in a minute. The opening stage directions describe Vivian. She's walks on an empty stage pushing an IV pole. That's those things you see in the hospitals that carry bags of blood or fluids or saline that are being pumped into a patient. She's 50, she's tall, she's very thin, she's barefoot, and completely bald. She wears two hospital gowns, one tied in the front, one tied in the back, and a baseball cap and a hospital ID bracelet. If you've never worn a hospital gown, you might not understand why she wears two, but they are always agape. And you have to decide if you're ever wearing one, you have to decide if you want to flash people your backside or your front side. She wears two, just to cover up her immodesty. Vivian is out of place. She belongs in a classroom. She belongs in a lecture hall. She belongs at Oxford somewhere. She introduces herself by saying, I am a professor of 17th century poetry, specializing in the holy sonnets of John Donne. That's her identity. That's who she is. That's how she thinks of herself. I mean, I understand a little bit. I've been a teacher for 26 years, and that's who I am. I would introduce myself that way. Because it's so ingrained in her identity, that's one of the most important, that's the first thing that she gets out. The other parts of her life are really trivial. Her family, her friends, her things like that. Those things actually really never come up in the play, except for the fact that she seems to be not married, not have any kids. Um, those are just sort of general insights into her character. In a way, she's a very archetypal character, sort of a stereotype of this Harvard professor who teaches all the time and doesn't really do anything or enjoy anything else. Vivian tells us in her opening monologue that she has stage 4 metastatic ovarian cancer. Now, this play was written in 1999, and I'm not sure what the truth of this is today, but in 1999, that's a death sentence. There is no stage 5. She's in the final throes of cancer, and her life span is going to be very limited. She quotes, funnily enough, she quotes Shakespeare in her opening monologue. She says, "Now our sands are almost run, a little more, and then dumb." That's a rather obscure line from Shakespeare. It's from Pericles, but when she says dumb, she means silence. Now our sands, and sands are usually symbolic of life, are almost run, a little, and then dumb. Again, this is the opening of a play, and we know that this play is going to end with her death. Everybody knows that. It's a tragedy. And she's already told you that she has this death sentence hanging over her. The first other character we meet is Dr. Kalikian, and I consider Dr. Kalikian to be a foil for Vivian Baring. Dr. Kalikian is a lot like her. They're both professors, they're both teachers, they're both doctors of a different sense. Um, there's a funny little thing that I want to explain to you because some people actually don't know this. There are two kinds of doctoral degrees. There's what's called a medical degree, and that's what those are the people we call doctor all the time. They're medical doctors. And there are people who have PhDs. That's every other kind of doctor except for medical doctor. Anything you can study, you can get a PhD in. What apparently a lot of people don't know is that a PhD, no matter what field you get it in, is a doctor of philosophy. If you get a degree in psychology, a doctorate in psychology, you have a PhD in psychology. If you get one in English literature, then you have a doctor of philosophy in English literature. That's what PhDs are. Vivian, of course, is a PhD. She's a doctor of English literature. Um, and her and Kalikian begin with this conversation where he tells her quite bluntly that she has cancer. It sounds to me like Dr. Kalikian gives this conversation to people all the time, and he's just thankful that he has somebody smart enough to be able to follow him so that he can give out his speech at a pace. I notice that he keeps looking for, is there somebody you want us to call, or is there something you want me to do, or is there something I can explain? Vivian is absorbing what he's saying, but she focuses on very specific words, like she focuses on the word insidious. That's what she does. She hears these lines of dialogue and she focuses in on them and she analyzes them like an English teacher would analyze a passage. As you're reading the play, you'll notice that Margaret Edson does a strange thing with the dialogue. Let me make this so you can see it. She does this thing where she has two speakers moving at the same time. This means that you're supposed to follow a little bit of both of the dialogue. Make sure you understand that whoever is speaking that's not Vivian is sort of in the background, and Vivian will always be in sort of the foreground. Um, Also, notice what she keeps doing. She's thinking about the word cancel, it's cancer itself, and she's looking for cognates or etymology or something to do with words so that because she feels like if she can better understand the words for things, then she better understands the things. Also, in a very subtle way, a lot of what she says is very funny. She asks herself, is anybody doing any research on cancer? That's such an understatement, it's hilarious. Dr. Kalikian wants Vivian to undergo chemotherapy. In the state that Vivian is in, chemotherapy is what's making her sick. It makes her hair fall out, it makes her lose weight, it makes her vomit, it destroys her immune system. So If she's anywhere other than a sterile hospital, she could easily catch something that could immediately kill her. So, I mean, chemotherapy is a very paradoxical thing, and the paradox between chemotherapy and John Donne, or the connections, those things are going to be pointed out to you over and over in the play. Um, the, if Vivian has stage 4 cancer, the best that she can hope for from chemotherapy is that it might extend her life a little bit. It's not going to save her. Kalikian wants her to take 8 rounds of full dose chemotherapy. One of his motivations is if she does that, then he can use the data that he gets from her to help other cancer patients in the future. That's his motivation. This is not a hopeful process for anybody. Vivian likes a test, and she's going to endure this chemotherapy, in part, I'm sure, to extend her life, in part in hopes of curing herself, but also because she knows that she's making a contribution. And that's what her life has always been about, making a contribution to some intellectual movement. That's what she does. In telling her life story, Vivian mentions a woman. Her name is E.M. Ashford. I think E.M. Ashford is sort of a fictionalization of a woman named Helen Gardner, but that doesn't matter. E.M. Ashford is the teacher who inspired Vivian Baring. Uh, Most of your teachers have somebody like this in their distant past, somebody who they strive to be like, somebody who inspired them to be a teacher. And even if you're not a teacher, hopefully when you're away at college, you'll find somebody like this who inspires your imagination, who drives you, and very often that person will change your life course. For Vivian, that woman is E.M. Ashford, who was the first person to inspire her with her studies of John Donne. Flashback to when Vivian is a graduate student. E.M. Ashford teaches Vivian that the last line of John Donne's holy sonnet, Death Be Not Proud, should read, And death shall be no more, comma, death thou shalt die. And for E.M. Ashford, the comma represents how little, how insignificant death is. That idea of whether or not that should be a comma or a semicolon is sort of a central motif in this play. Vivian is going to come back to that at the end of the play. It's why the play's title is often spelled the way that it is. We'll talk about this another time. But the other truth is that despite what E.M. Ashford taught her about the sonnet, E.M. Ashford also told her, Vivian, go out, hang out with your friends, have a little fun. But Vivian rejects that advice, and it is an insight into Vivian's character flaw. That's something that I want us to think about. Now, the next scene that happens, or the next thing that unfolds, are these series of technicians doing tests on Vivian. It's fascinating the way that they do this, but for all of them, Vivian's not a real human being. They ask her name and, of course, don't remember it. They ask her the name of the doctor. She has to spell everything for them. At one point, she gets frustrated and says, My name is Lucy, Countess of Bedford. That's a very obscure historical allusion. Lucy, Count of Bedford, is an important person in Shakespeare's time, and she was a patron of John Donne's, but these people think that she's crazy. Um, and so her jokes are lost on the technicians, but they're not lost on us. We see her wit. Vivian shares with us her contributions to academia. When she's an undergraduate, she works for E.M. Ashford, but it sounds to me like the work she does is trivial. She alphabetizes cards, things like that. And then when she's doing her doctoral work, um, She does get something published by University Press. That's probably going to happen to a third of you. It's just who publishes academic writing. Um, but then, and actually, I love the title of her book. It's just called Made Cunningly. It's from a line in one of John Donne's poems. I'm pretty sure we read it, where John Donne says, "I am a little world made cunningly." Anyway, we start getting new characters coming in. Jason is going to come in, and he's a former student of Vivian's. He's also a student of Dr. Kalikian's, and he's going to give Vivian a pelvic exam. I think some of you might not know what a pelvic exam is, but just so you understand, he's going to put his fingers inside of her, and when he does, it's really horrific. It's such an invasion. And not only that, but when he does it, he feels very awkward and is behaving in a really unprofessional way. He does, we can tell from the expressions and the stage directions, he does feel the tumor. He feels the mass, and it must be so awful that it frightens him. But this is a horrific, awkward situation. It gives us some insight into how dehumanizing the medical system, at least the one I grew up in, can actually be, and how awful it is to be a part of it. Jason is almost like still just a kid, but he's eager and he wants to learn. You can see how he's got some of the same character flaws as Vivian Baring herself. Um, and so he would rather be doing research than what he's doing right now. And you'll see for the rest of the play how he's very bad at being real human. His foil character, of course, is Susie, who's just kind and sweet and loving all the time, including at times when Vivian is not very lovable. All right, this is going to be the point where you stop watching me and you go ahead and read.